Welcome to The Culture Bar, a panel discussion podcast exploring, dissecting, and shedding light on important topics in the arts and music world which matter to you.
Hello all. We have just recorded a fantastic podcast about how the arts can respond to the climate emergency. That was with Sam Lee, Crispin Woodhead, and Alex Sobel MP. That podcast will be out on the 22nd of April, so do check it out. And Alex is kindly with us again now for a quick one-on-one, an after-hours chat, a fireside chinwag, if you will, to discuss issues relating to the arts more broadly. Alex is a member of the UK Parliament, whose constituency is Leeds North West, and he is also Shadow Minister for the Arts, Heritage and Tourism. So if you don't mind, Alex, we're going to dive straight in. Now, Alex, we had colleague Jamie Stone MP on the podcast recently, and since then, he's been leading a campaign to repurpose the £120 million for the Festival UK, aka the Brexit Festival. Is that something which you endorse?
Well, I mean, what's the bigger event this year, Brexit or COP and the UK's presidency of the G7? Wouldn't it be much better to have a climate emergency festival or a net zero festival? Obviously, the chair, Net Zero PPG, I would put a bid in for the UK Net Zero Festival. I could volunteer to chair the committee. So, yeah, absolutely.
Fair enough. Well, hopefully there will also be responses within that brief for the Festival UK to the climate emergency, but it's interesting to be aware of that. But at the time of talking, the budget came out a couple of days ago. And more generally, is there any comfort the arts and heritage and the sector more broadly can take from the budget?
The budget was a short-term response to COVID, if we're honest. And lots of organisations were looking at a cliff edge. And for many of those organisations, the cliff edge has been moved forward, which is the pattern of the government. Cliff edge approaches, they move the cliff edge, and those that were on the cliff, if you like, that they're saved temporarily. So, the announcements around furlough, the announcements around business rates, the announcements around VAT for tourism and hospitality. If you're running a music venue or a nightclub, or you're in an arts organisation where you're furloughed, then that is all good news. The government, I think, sold something that wasn't really a solution in the fact that Rishi Sunak said that they were going to include a big group of people who've been excluded for all support, which disproportionately hits creative industries. So the 3 million excluded, the gaps in support for COVID, a group of people. So he included people who'd registered for self-employment later and done a return for 2019-20, but the Excluded UK's analysis shows that that's only 155,000 out of 3 million. So great for that 155,000, absolutely, but it doesn't resolve the problem. We're still actually in excess of 3 million excluded, and that is devastating for those individuals. What we've seen actually, and I've got personal experiences in my constituencies, people who are involved in the creative industries, whether that was I've got a guy who is a lighting rig guy, I've got people who are artists, they've gone for retraining and they've left the creative industries, and I'm not sure they're going to go back.
Well, I think there was, I don't know the exact figure, but the Musicians Union brought out a survey very recently. I'd say it's a very high proportion, I think of 30% plus of musicians have either left or considering leaving the industry, which of course is tragic. But could I ask, what are you doing for those 3 million people that have been excluded? Because as you say, a lot of them are in the creative industries by the very nature of the way that we work.
Yeah. I mean, right at the beginning of the crisis, I wrote, slightly before, in fact, I wrote an article in The Independent calling for a universal basic income. You can even just have universal basic income for the creative industries. In America, they've just passed the 1.9 trillion stimulus, which includes, I think it's now $1,400 check for every, I can't remember if it's family or worker, but everybody, which is a form of, direct payment. It's a form of universal basic income. Those things can all happen. We know who those people are that are excluded. The government could give them a one-off payment. The government could provide them support. There are a whole range of things that could happen. There is a single solution, but there are lots of options, and they could just pick one of those options, and that will be the solution. And we're continuing to carry on campaigning on this in the Gaps in Support All Party group, which I'm a member of, which is a real cross-party group. It has a Conservative chair. I don't really understand how the government can't feel the pressure on this. They have spent a lot of money in other areas, but not on this, and it just seems to be like they've got real blockage in this area. I don't really understand why, but that's just how it is.
Well, one of the other elements that's quite pertinent for the arts, which was perhaps missed out on this budget, and there's been lobbying for some time, is about insurance indemnity. Now, this has been extended to the film industry, but not to other elements of the creative industries. And do you know why that might be?
I don't, because this was raised during the Brexit touring debate. This was raised in the petitions committee discussion. So DCMs ministers, if they weren't aware of it before, because of COVID, they became very acutely aware of it because of the Brexit touring issue. And, a lot of festivals have announced, including Leeds Festival, which is obviously my local major music festival, which I think this year will be the largest music festival in the UK, because we've got no Glastonbury, because it was obviously very early in the season, too close to the date where festivals could start. And those festivals, although announced, might not go ahead because they can't afford the insurance costs or can't get insurance. And so they need that insurance indemnity scheme. And those festivals need to happen, because those festivals are a lifeline to tens of thousands of musicians and other creatives. Festivals aren't just about musicians, they're about comedians, they're about writers, they're about visual artists, they're around a whole range of people. And then obviously all the infrastructure supports them, all of the lighting people, the sound people, the rigging people, that whole, and then also all of the touring vans and buses. There's a whole huge supply chain here supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs, and if they can't get insurance, that is going to create a huge hole in the economy. I've not seen the analysis, but I think it's over £1 billion hole in the economy because of this tiny bit that the government could just unlock by backing or indemnifying festival insurance, which they have, as you've rightly said, have done for the film industry. So hopefully, there's still time. We're only in March, so the government could still come around to it. It doesn't need a budget for them to make that decision.
Well, let's hope so. And it's great to hear that you're lobbying for that. You mentioned about Leeds Festival. I'm sure that's you're obviously, of course, very passionate about, but I'm also aware that Leeds were putting together a bid to be the European Capital of Culture in 2023. And of course, I believe they're no longer able to do that as part of the Brexit agreement. But I gather they've pivoted. I thought this is a story worth celebrating, that they're still going to have a cultural year of celebration in 2023. It would be great to hear your thoughts on that.
So absolutely. I was on the council when this all happened still. As the lead for climate change, and we tried through various routes to retain that capital of culture, but the EU were very clear: if you're not in the EU and you're not a state bidding to become in the EU, because we have had European capital of culture in countries that aren't members of the EU but are bidding to join the EU, accession countries. So that was really disappointing news. I firmly believe that Leeds would have been the European Capital of Culture if we could have stayed. So the council decided to pivot and have a year of culture. And it was the right decision in many ways, because when we made the decision, when we were bidding for the European Capital of Culture, Channel 4 hadn't decided where they were moving, but they decided to move to Leeds. The government hadn't decided they were going to have a British Library in the north and hadn't decided where it's going to be, but it's going to be in Leeds. I think if we'd abandoned our commitment to culture, we wouldn't have had that inward investment, creating hundreds of jobs into the Leeds economy. There are opponents. The city council budget is very tight. The government cuts to councils up and down the country have meant that things which are not statutory have been at risk. Leeds has cut the amount of money that it's giving to the year of culture, and we do need the private sector to pick that up, so we can have a successful year. But there are still critics who are saying they should scrap it completely. But my very strong view is that culture is part of our recovery. It's part of our the need that it also brings in other investment. We've just got the National Infrastructure Bank in the budget as well, and I think all of that draws people to be in Leeds, stay in Leeds. And for Leeds, we have vibrant capital of the north alongside Manchester and Liverpool and Newcastle and Sheffield and the other big cities of the north as a counterweight to London. So people feel they've got careers in the north and northern cities in all areas, and culture is really important part of that, as is transport, as is housing. So that decision by the city has already paid dividends, will continue to pay dividends, although it is a strain on its budget.
Well, that's really great to hear. And one thing I wanted to ask you was also about the North-South divide, the government's ambitions to level up the country, and with that in an arts context, I mean, I've got some figures here that culture funding per head in London, this is between 2010 to 2018, was £687 per head, but in the rest of the UK is £144. Does that demonstrate that there's levelling up happening? Doesn't sound like it, and also the value of the arts in the UK more broadly, but specifically outside of London.
I mean, I'm not a big fan of the north-south economic divide, because there are places in the south of England, you know, if you think of somewhere like Cornwall, which are also hugely disadvantaged, which also have low per head funding on a whole range of issues. But I think that we've got a structural problem in this country, which I'm really passionate about, that we have the most centralised country in Europe. You know, we've got these forms of devolution. We're about to have a Metro Mayor in West Yorkshire, who actually, the Labour candidate's Tracy Brabin, a huge, you know, former actress, director, producer, writer, a huge cultural figure, political cultural figure. So, you know, so we're going to hopefully have that cultural dividend if she's elected mayor. But the problem is that we don't have, we should be a federal country where we have, whatever the geographic boundaries of that are, we have full devolution with devolved powers, with tax raising powers, and that means that we can spend that money, we can make those decisions much more locally, regionally, rather than decisions all being made by a man sat in Downing Street, or two men, to be fair, Boris and Rishi, sat in Downing Street deciding what's going to happen all around the country on a postcode lottery. That is not what happens in France or Germany or Italy or Spain. And that is why, if you go to those countries, that many of the other cities, Germany's a really good example of this, you know, have got, you know, huge cultural dividends, huge transport dividends, huge housing dividends, because the power doesn't all reside in the capital of the country. It resides in the regions. We need to recast our constitutional settlement so there's much more power in the regions. I think that will also have an effect on the UK constitutionally, because we are breaking apart at the seams, and you know there is increased pressures for parts of the UK, Northern Ireland, Scotland specifically, to no longer be part of the UK. And I think this all is part of that constitutional settlement. And I have to be very critical of the Conservative parties. Their conservatism has created this, and they have unleashed a whirlwind, and they need to redistribute power to balance that whirlwind and calm it down.
Could you argue that more devolution, more local politics will actually lead to more bureaucracy, more cost? So is it actually more effective? Does the money go to the heart of the issue?
I mean, it isn't, you know, if you look at those other countries, that isn't the case. And the reality is, you know, this argument about bureaucracy, the percentage, if you have, you know, particularly if you have lean institutions, bureaucracy is a very small amount of cost compared to the dividends you'll get in inward investment, in tax take, in knowing where the need is and how to spend it. You know, if you have, just because you've centralised your bureaucracy doesn't mean there's going to be any cheaper.
Fair enough. So it's actually by having that local knowledge, the local authorities, it's more effective spending as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's also about, you know, we're quite a large country, you know, in particularly in European terms. You know, our population's nudging 80 million. So it's about having units which stack up. You know, having units of around 5 million, 4, 5, 6, 7 million people does make sense bureaucratically. I'm not suggesting that we make parishes, you know, villages of 5,000 people responsible for collecting income tax. That would be absurd. You know, but I'm talking about putting, having regions, many of which will be the size of Belgium. That's what I'm suggesting, which itself is a regional country, you know.
Yeah, I'm going to shift gear to contested heritage. That's been quite a pertinent issue recently. I know heritage is also part of your brief, and there was a meeting very recently between Oliver Dowden and the various people that are running the museums around the country. And there's been lots of kickback, in particular for the National Trust and Professor Corinne Fowler's report on colonialism and the history of slavery, particularly also from the Conservative government. But what are your thoughts on contested heritage? Should we be highlighting some of our difficult past, or should we be glossing over it?
I mean, it's very interesting because the government are picking and choosing what is contested heritage. So, so I believe very strongly in academic and curatorial independence. So we have to allow institutions to have their independence and for government not to interfere in it. We need to have transparent grant-making processes which aren't politically influenced. You know, if I was the minister and I was in charge of the grant process, I wouldn't be signing off on grants because my politics might influence them. There might be some quite conservative institution doing something, you know, that I'm not particularly interested in. And I'm not signing off this grant because it doesn't speak to the concerns of my constituents or working class communities or whatever it is. But that really shouldn't be my decision. And the same thing goes for Oliver Dowden. And so once, you know, it's right for the government to set criteria, but that criteria has to respect that academic and curatorial independence and allow, you know, a neutral process once it's set. And I think that they're also picking and choosing because there's bits of our heritage which are being dismantled by the government without any support. So, for instance, there's a project in near Banbury around the sort of work that was done during the Cold War, and the government, they're not giving it any support. But that is also part of our history, contested history as well. So on one hand, they're saying this is settled history, don't contest it. And on the other hand, they themselves, you know, are taking actions. It just depends on which period you choose. And so that doesn't make any sense. If they're saying, well, in this period, we're not contesting, in this period, we are contesting, you know, how it just looks like they're playing politics with it.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point to highlight. And I know there's been reports about museum and heritage sectors their funding being threatened if they're not highlighting certain issues, or rather if they're not downplaying certain issues, which of course, as you say, we need that independence. Do you think that independence also extends to the BBC as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, state broadcasters in many places and historically have been broadcasters directed by the state, but that's never been the UK tradition, and shouldn't be. So I'm a big defender of the license fee. The BBC has changed, has adapted. You know, you just need to look at something like the Sounds app or iPlayer. They are public service broadcaster, but they also provide content for groups that are indicated for. I mean, I alluded it in earlier. It's like you know, I listen to Radio 6 a lot. You know, who else would provide that content if the BBC didn't provide it? You know, I think that the BBC should be a cherished institution, and the government should, you know, through DCMs and through the levers it's got, such as appointing the chair of the BBC, etc., encourage it to reform and change and stay relevant. If the BBC becomes irrelevant, then there'll be a problem. But that doesn't seem to me to be what's happening at the moment. The decision just this week to bring BBC Three back to being a broadcast channel was because they had really successful shows online, like Years and Years, for instance, or the one at the moment, PRU or PRU, that pupil referral unit. And they reacted to that, reacted to the market, and brought it back. And that's exactly the way the BBC should operate.
Here. I'd love to go into more detail about these sort of things, but I'm just going to shift gear one last time for one last point. One of the things which our industry would also like some comfort on is knowing that there is some consensus amongst governments to try and resolve the issue with work permits, travelling and working in the EU. There's been lots of he said, she said. The EU claimed that the UK rejected the offer and vice versa. Do you know what actually happened, and also what is being done right this minute to help resolve this issue?
We just talk about contested history. We're just going through contested contemporary history here. So, you know, there's a letter from the EU to, I think it's either an Irish MP or a minister, which says, you know, what you've just said, that it was the UK's decision. And then Caroline Dinenage saying in the chamber that it was the EU's decision. Now, really, I'm going to reflect what the industry said. We don't really care like whose decision it is now. It just needs resolving. And my very strong view is that the officials from DCMS and the Home Office and potentially Bays and the Cabinet Office just need to get in a room with the EU, whether it's a Zoom room or a real room, and just hammer it out before the summer hits. Because once touring's back, once the festival circuit's back, we talk about UK festivals. What about European festivals? UK acts European festivals. For some artists, that is a lifeline for them this year. Either the UK festival circuit or the European festival circuit, or a combination of both. And so they've really got a couple of months to resolve this, and they need to, and they can't just resolve one issue. They can't just resolve the work permits issue. They need to resolve all of the issues. They need to resolve the cabotage issue. They need to resolve the equipment hire issue. They need to resolve all the issues together. They need to have a cohesive package. It is possible without any treaty change, and so they just need to really focus down and get it done.
Do you think that sense of urgency is felt in DCMS? Because we certainly feel it. I work in touring at the moment, and you can already feel promoters' apprehension about engaging UK ensembles, which of course is the last thing we want. And as you mentioned earlier, that soft power is vital for the UK.
I think they are feeling it. Whether they're acting on it, I can't tell, but I hope that they are. And it's fair enough they're doing it without running a public commentary. I completely understand that. But the important thing is the outcome, and that we get an outcome before the summer. An outcome for 2022 is not really very helpful. I mean, it's obviously better than no outcome at all, but really should happen for this summer.
Absolutely. And could I ask, what are you doing to help that process along?
I mean, I've written to Oliver Dowden on this, and this isn't directly my brief because I don't cover that bit. So in the debates and everything, it's been Ali McGovern who's responded. But I've been working with Ali, like I said earlier. I'm speaking to various musicians and venue promoters. There's a new organisation for touring, which I think is called Touring UK, but I might have got that wrong. And I dropped a line to its chair, Stuart Galbraith, and I spoke to local people around it. And just I'm engaging with the sector. I'm engaged with Live Music Trust and Music UK. I was in a meeting just last week with people like Melvin Ben and Sasha Lord on this issue as well, and having a whole team response to support Ali, who's the main Shadow Minister, in her work with the government. So, there's a whole team effort in the Shadow DCMS team. This is right at the top of our agenda. But at the end of the day, we can't negotiate with the EU, only the government can.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time and for all your efforts championing the causes for the arts. We look forward to seeing how all that develops.